The morning sun streamed through the massive windows of San Francisco International Airport's Terminal 3 as a man in his mid-40s walked quietly toward his gate. He wore simple dark jeans, a plain black t-shirt, and carried a well-worn leather backpack. Nothing about his appearance suggested he was worth billions. His phone buzzed constantly with notifications, but he ignored them, preferring to observe the bustling life around him. This was Mr. Chen, though most people in the tech world knew him as the founder of Data Stream Solutions, a company that had revolutionized cloud computing. Despite his massive success, he remained remarkably down-to-earth. Growing up in a working-class family had taught him the value of humility, a lesson he carried even after his company's IPO had made him one of the wealthiest people in Silicon Valley. As he approached Gate 73, he noticed the usual first-class boarding line forming. A group of executives in crisp suits chatted loudly about their recent golf games, while a famous actor tried to remain inconspicuous behind designer sunglasses. Mr. Chen hung back, sipping his simple black coffee from a local cafe rather than the expensive airport chains. "Now boarding first-class passengers for Flight 1382 to New York," announced the gate agent, her voice carrying over the terminal's ambient noise. Mr. Chen waited patiently, letting others rush forward first. He'd learned long ago that the plane wouldn't leave any sooner, no matter how quickly you boarded. Walking down the jet bridge, he remembered how he used to fly economy class just 5 years ago. Success had come late to him. He was nearly 40 when his company finally took off. The memory of those struggling years kept him grounded even now. The first-class cabin welcomed him with its stubble lighting and plush leather seats. A flight attendant, who would later be central to this story, gave him a quick once-over as he approached his seat. Her name tag read Ms. Rivera, and something in her expression suggested she already made assumptions about him based on his casual appearance. Mr. Chen stored his backpack in the overhead compartment and settled into seat 2A. While other passengers fussed over their seats and demanded pre-flight champagne, he pulled out a dog-eared paperback, a science fiction novel he'd been meaning to finish for weeks. The simple pleasure of reading helped him tune out the chaos of boarding. A young software developer recognized him and did a double take from the aisle. Mr. Chen gave him a friendly nod, but returned to his book, appreciating that the young man didn't make a fuss. This was exactly why he preferred to dress casually. It helped him maintain a low profile and connect with people naturally. As the final passengers boarded, flight attendant Ms. Rivera moved through the cabin, her heels clicking sharply against the floor. She offered hang-up service for suits and coats to other first-class passengers, but passed by Mr. Chen without a word. He noticed but didn't react, having experienced similar treatment before. The captain's voice crackled over the intercom, announcing their flight time of 5 hours and 20 minutes to New York. Mr. Chen settled deeper into his seat, unaware that this routine flight was about to become anything but ordinary. In less than an hour, an incident would unfold that would not only change his day, but would send ripples through the entire airline industry. Looking out the window, he watched the ground crew complete their final checks. The morning fog was just starting to lift off the San Francisco Bay, revealing the city's iconic skyline in the distance. In his pocket, his phone buzzed again, probably his team updating him about their latest project launch. But for now, he wanted to savor these quiet moments before takeoff, unaware that they would be his last peaceful moments for quite some time. The aircraft pushed back from the gate, its engines humming to life. As they taxied toward the runway, Mr. Chen observed Ms. Rivera preparing the cabin for takeoff, her movements efficient but somehow tense. Little did either of them know that their paths were about to cross in a way that would make headlines across the country and spark a long-overdue conversation about prejudice in the airline industry. The flight had been cruising smoothly for about 30 minutes when Ms. Rivera began the beverage service. She moved methodically through the first-class cabin, her practiced smile in place as she served drinks to the passengers. The businessman in 1A received his requested scotch with a flourish, while the actor in 1C was presented with his sparkling water and line with particular attention. When she reached Mr. Chen's seat, her smile faltered slightly. He had been absorbed in his book, but looked up when he sensed her presence. "Good morning," he said warmly. "Could I have a glass of champagne, please?" Ms. Rivera's expression shifted from professional politeness to poorly concealed disdain. She glanced at his casual attire once again, her eyes lingering on his well-worn backpack tucked under the seat. "Sir," she said, her voice carrying just loud enough for nearby passengers to hear, "this is the first-class cabin. Economy service will begin shortly." Several heads turned their way. Mr. Chen remained calm, speaking in the same gentle tone he used when mentoring young entrepreneurs. "I understand. I'm in the correct seat, 2A. Here's my boarding pass." He reached for his phone to show her his digital ticket. Ms. Rivera's face flushed red. Instead of checking his ticket, she leaned closer and whispered harshly, "I don't know how you got in here, but I've dealt with seat upgraders before. Return to your proper cabin immediately." The tension in the air grew thick. Other passengers shifted uncomfortably in their seats, some pulling out their phones to record what was unfolding. Mr. Chen stayed seated, his voice remaining steady. "Ms. Rivera, I'd be happy to show you my ticket and ID. There seems to be a misunderstanding." What happened next seemed to occur in slow motion. As Mr. Chen reached again for his phone, Ms. Rivera's hand shot out, striking him across the face with an open palm. The slap echoed through the quiet cabin. "Don't you dare try to intimidate me," she hissed, her words carrying undertones that made several passengers gasp. The cabin fell completely silent. Even the constant hum of the engines seemed muted in the aftermath of what had just happened. Mr. Chen sat perfectly still, his hand slowly rising to his cheek where a red mark was forming. His eyes, however, remained calm and focused. A passenger from 3B stood up, phone recording. "I got that all on video," he announced. Another passenger pressed their flight attendant call button repeatedly. From economy class, curious faces peered through the curtain divider, drawn by the commotion. Ms. Rivera suddenly seemed to realize the gravity of what she'd done. Her hand trembled as she gripped her service cart, her face draining of color. The head flight attendant rushed forward, having heard the commotion, but froze when she saw the scene before her. Mr. Chen finally spoke, his voice quiet but clear. "I'd like your employee number and full name, please." He wasn't angry or threatening. If anything, his tone carried a note of sadness, and I'd appreciate it if someone could verify my ticket now. The head flight attendant quickly checked Mr. Chen's boarding pass and ID, her face growing pale as she recognized his name. She whispered something urgently to Ms. Rivera, whose aggressive posture crumpled as realization dawned on her face. Other flight attendants had gathered now, speaking in hushed tones and throwing worried glances their way. Passengers continued recording, their phones capturing every moment of the tense scene. One of them, a woman in 2C, handed Mr. Chen a glass of water with a sympathetic look. Mr. Chen took out his phone, made a brief call, and spoke so quietly that only those nearest could hear. They were right, we still have work to do. He wasn't calling his lawyers or demanding revenge. Instead, he was contacting his chief of staff with an entirely different plan in mind. Ms. Rivera stood frozen by her cart, the reality of her actions sinking in as murmurs spread through the cabin. She had just assaulted one of the most influential tech leaders in the country, a man known for transforming industries. But more importantly, she had revealed a deep-seated prejudice that would soon spark a national conversation about bias in customer service. The flight still had 4 hours to go, and this was only the beginning of a story that would change not just one airline, but an entire industry's approach to diversity and inclusion. The next hour aboard Flight 1382 felt like an eternity. The silence in the first-class cabin was broken only by hushed whispers and the occasional click of phones still recording the aftermath. Mr. Chen sat quietly, holding a cold compress that another flight attendant had brought for his cheek. He declined their offer to move Ms. Rivera to another section of the plane, saying simply, "That won't solve anything." The head flight attendant had radioed the captain, who made the decision to continue to New York rather than make an emergency landing. Security would be waiting at JFK Airport, she explained to the passengers, trying to restore some sense of normalcy to the flight. Videos of the incident were already spreading across social media, even with the plane's limited Wi-Fi. A young passenger in 4C whispered to her seatmate, "It's trending on 3 different platforms." The clips showed the slap from multiple angles, each one more damning than the last. Mr. Chen used this time to do something unexpected. He pulled out his laptop and began working on what looked like a presentation. Those seated nearby could glimpse the title, Transforming Corporate Culture, a Practical Approach. He wasn't plotting revenge or drafting angry emails. Instead, he was turning this horrible moment into an opportunity for change. The other passengers reacted in various ways to the tense atmosphere. The businessman from 1A kept glancing back nervously, perhaps recognizing Mr. Chen from tech industry events. The actor in 1C had removed his designer sunglasses and was typing furiously on his phone, likely in contact with his publicist about whether to make a public statement. A flight attendant named Mr. Wom, who had taken over Ms. Rivera's duties, approached Mr. Chen with genuine concern. "Sir, is there anything else you need?" he asked quietly. Mr. Chen looked up from his laptop and smiled warmly. "Just some green tea if you have it. And please make sure Ms. Rivera gets some water. She looks shaken." This simple act of compassion surprised everyone within earshot. Ms. Rivera, who had been stationed at the back of the first-class cabin, visibly flinched at this show of kindness. She had spent the last hour standing rigid against the wall, her face a mask of regret and fear. As the flight continued, passengers began sharing their own stories in hushed voices. A doctor from 3A talked about facing discrimination in hospitals. An elderly woman recalled being dismissed in high-end stores. The incident had opened a floodgate of similar experiences, turning the first-class cabin into an impromptu forum on prejudice in customer service. Mr. Chen listened to these conversations while continuing his work. Occasionally, he would pause his typing to jot down notes in a small notebook, capturing ideas sparked by the discussions around him. His calm demeanor had a ripple effect. What could have been a scene of chaos instead became a powerful moment of reflection. The in-flight Wi-Fi connection buzzed with activity as news of the incident spread. Corporate communications teams at the airline's headquarters were scrambling to respond. They didn't know yet that Mr. Chen was already crafting a solution that would go far beyond their standard crisis management playbook. 3 hours into the flight, the head flight attendant made an announcement about beginning landing preparations, her voice carrying a note of relief that the journey was nearly over. Mr. Chen packed away his laptop and pulled out his phone, making one final call before they would need to switch off electronic devices. "Everything ready?" he asked someone on the other end. "Good. Remember, the goal isn't to punish, it's to improve." After listening for a moment, he added, "And make sure there's no harsh treatment of Ms. Rivera when we land. This is about fixing systems, not breaking people." As the plane began its initial descent into New York, the setting sun cast long shadows through the cabin windows. Mr. Chen closed his eyes briefly, thinking about the long night ahead. There would be meetings, press statements, and decisions to make. But his mind was already looking beyond the immediate crisis, seeing possibilities where others might only see problems. The other passengers watched him with a mixture of admiration and curiosity. They had witnessed something rare. A person with every right to be angry choosing instead to be constructive. Nobody knew exactly what would happen when they landed, but there was a sense that this flight would become more than just another viral video. It would become a catalyst for real change. Ms. Rivera, still at her position in the back, watched Mr. Chen's reflection in the darkening windows. She couldn't know that his response to her actions would eventually transform not just her career, but the entire airline industry's approach to customer service and employee training. While the plane continued its journey eastward, Mr. Chen's quiet phone calls set powerful forces in motion. His executive assistant, already alerted to the situation, had assembled a team of researchers who began digging into the airline's history. What they uncovered in those few hours painted a troubling picture that went far beyond one isolated incident. "Sir," his assistant's voice came through quietly on his phone, "we've found similar complaints dating back 5 years. Most were quietly settled or dismissed." Mr. Chen made notes in his small leather notebook, his expression thoughtful. This wasn't just about one flight attendant's actions anymore, it was about a system that needed fixing. In the airline's corporate headquarters, emergency meetings were already underway. The CEO had been woken up with news of the viral video, which had now reached millions of views across social platforms. Crisis management teams huddled in conference rooms, preparing statements and damage control strategies. What they didn't expect was the email that arrived from Mr. Chen's team. Instead of threats of lawsuits or demands for firing, it contained a detailed proposal. The subject line read simply, "An opportunity for industry leadership in diversity and inclusion." Back on the plane, Mr. Chen continued working on his laptop, refining the presentation he'd started earlier. His quiet focus drew curious glances from other passengers who had expected angry phone calls or visible distress. Instead, they watched as he methodically built something that looked like a comprehensive training program. The head flight attendant, checking on him again, caught a glimpse of his screen. "Is that? Are you designing a customer service curriculum?" she asked, unable to hide her surprise. Mr. Chen nodded. Sometimes the best response to a problem is to solve it for everyone, not just yourself. His team's research had revealed that the airline industry as a whole struggled with similar issues. Customer complaints about bias occurred across all major carriers, but few companies had taken meaningful steps to address the root causes. Mr. Chen saw an opportunity to transform an entire industry's approach to customer service. During one of his quiet phone calls, he reached out to Dr. Thompson, a leading expert in corporate diversity training. "I need you on a flight to New York tonight," he explained. "We're going to design something new, not just sensitivity training, but a complete overhaul of how airlines approach customer interaction." The airline's board members, reading through Mr. Chen's proposal, found themselves surprised by its scope and vision. Instead of demanding Ms. Rivera's termination, he was offering to invest in the airline's future. His team had outlined a comprehensive plan that included a revolutionary training program developed by top experts in diversity and customer service, technology solutions to help track and prevent bias incidents, a scholarship program for underprivileged students interested in aviation careers, a complete review and overhaul of company policies and procedures. In the plane's first-class cabin, a flight attendant named Mr. Wong approached with another cup of green tea. "The crew's been talking," he said softly. "Whatever happens when we land, thank you for not demanding anyone be fired." Mr. Chen smiled. Change doesn't come from punishment, it comes from education and understanding. Meanwhile, social media was ablaze with discussion. The video had sparked heated debates about prejudice in customer service, but Mr. Chen's visible calm in the face of discrimination was drawing particular attention. Comments poured in from people sharing their own experiences, turning a potentially negative viral moment into a constructive discussion about systemic change. His phone buzzed with a message from his chief of staff. "News networks requesting interviews at JFK. Also, airline CEO wants to meet immediately upon landing." Mr. Chen replied with simple instructions: "Set up meeting at our NY office. And make sure Ms. Rivera is invited, she needs to be part of the solution." The plane was now just 2 hours from New York, but the wheels of change were already turning at full speed. Corporate leadership teams were reviewing Mr. Chen's proposal, civil rights organizations were preparing statements of support, and industry experts were being consulted on the feasibility of his suggested reforms. At the back of the first-class cabin, Ms. Rivera watched these developments unfold with a mixture of fear and confusion. She had expected fury and demands for her job. Instead, she was witnessing something altogether different, a masterclass in turning a moment of conflict into an opportunity for widespread positive change. As the sun began to set outside the airplane windows, Mr. Chen finished another section of his presentation. The title slide now read, "Building a More Inclusive Sky. A New Approach to Airline Customer Service." In just a few hours, he had laid the groundwork for changes that would affect not just one airline, but potentially the entire industry. The scene at JFK Airport was unlike anything the regular staff had ever seen. News vans lined the terminal entrance, and social media reporters clustered near the arrival gate. Word had spread about what happened on Flight 1382, but no one expected what came next. As passengers began deplaning, Mr. Chen did something unexpected. He waited. He let others exit first, including Ms. Rivera, who was escorted by airport security. Then, instead of heading to the waiting press conference, he walked straight to the airline's main office within the terminal. Inside the office, tension filled the air. The airline's regional director was there, along with several board members who had flown in specifically for this crisis. They had prepared for threats of lawsuits, public relations disasters, and demands for firing. Instead, Mr. Chen walked in, set up his laptop, and began his presentation. Today's incident isn't about one person, he began, his voice calm but firm. It's about a system that needs updating. He clicked to the first slide, titled Building a Better Airline Industry, a $50 million investment in change. The room fell silent. On the screen, Mr. Chen outlined his proposal. The airline would receive a significant investment from his tech company, but with specific conditions. Every dollar would go toward creating the most comprehensive anti-discrimination program in aviation history. But what about Ms. Rivera? One board member asked nervously. Mr. Chen's response surprised everyone. She should be the first participant in our new training program. Who'd better to help us understand what needs to change? Meanwhile, in a small conference room nearby, Ms. Rivera sat with her union representative, expecting the worst. Her hands shook as she watched the viral video of herself, now playing on every news channel. But then something unexpected happened. She received an invitation to join the meeting upstairs. Back in the main conference room, Mr. Chen's team had arrived with Dr. Thompson, the diversity expert who had flown in on short notice. Together, they presented a revolutionary approach to airline customer service. The technology team would develop an AI-powered system to identify patterns of bias in customer interactions, not to punish employees, but to create teaching opportunities. The training program would include virtual reality simulations, allowing staff to experience customer service from multiple perspectives. Mr. Chen's investment would also fund scholarships for underprivileged students interested in aviation careers. We're not just fixing today's problems, he explained, we're building tomorrow's solutions. When Ms. Rivera entered the room, many expected tension. Instead, Mr. Chen offered her a seat at the table. Your experience today will help us understand where our training needs to improve, he said. Would you be willing to work with us on this? Tears formed in her eyes as she nodded. This wasn't the punishment she had expected. It was an opportunity to be part of something transformative. The airline's CEO, who had been listening via video conference, spoke up. This is more than we could have hoped for. But why invest so much in us after what happened? Mr. Chen smiled and shared a story he rarely told. He spoke about his early days in America, about the times he was judged by his appearance rather than his abilities. Change happens, he said, when we choose to learn from our mistakes rather than hide from them. As the meeting continued, word spread throughout the airline industry. Other carriers began calling, wanting to know if they could participate in the training program. Civil rights organizations offered their support and expertise. What had started as a crisis was becoming a movement. The board members exchanged looks of amazement as Mr. Chen detailed the financial benefits of being an industry leader in diversity and inclusion. His team had data showing how improved customer service could increase revenue, reduce complaints, and build brand loyalty. Outside, the press waited for a statement, expecting drama and accusations. Instead, they received an invitation to witness the signing of a historic agreement, one that would change how airlines approach customer service forever. Ms. Rivera, still processing everything, found herself included in the planning discussions. Her perspective as a frontline employee was valuable, they said. Her mistake, rather than ending her career, had become a catalyst for industry-wide improvement. As evening fell over New York City, the airline's stock price, which had plummeted when the video first went viral, began to recover. The market was responding positively to news of the investment and training program. What could have been a corporate disaster had transformed into an opportunity for growth. The last item on the meeting agenda surprised everyone. Mr. Chen suggested having Ms. Rivera help design part of the training program. Sometimes, he said, the best teachers are those who have learned from their own mistakes. 6 months after the incident on Flight 1382, the airline's main training center buzzed with activity. The building, once a simple office space, had been transformed into a state-of-the-art learning facility. Today was special. The first graduating class of the new Diversity and Customer Service program was about to complete their training. In the front row sat Ms. Rivera, no longer just a participant, but now one of the program's key instructors. Her journey from that difficult day to becoming a leader in the airline's transformation wasn't easy, but it had changed her in ways she never expected. I remember being so afraid of losing my job, she told the graduating class. Instead, I found a new purpose. Her voice carried the confidence of someone who had faced their own biases and grown stronger from the experience. The training center itself showed how much had changed. Virtual reality stations lined one wall, where staff could experience customer interactions from different perspectives. In another room, AI-powered simulators helped employees recognize and correct unconscious bias in real time. Mr. Chen's tech team had outdone themselves. They created software that could analyze customer service interactions and provide immediate feedback, not to punish but to teach. The system had already helped identify patterns that the airline never noticed before. "Look at these numbers," the airline's training director said during the ceremony, pointing to a large screen. Customer satisfaction scores had risen by 40%. Complaints about discrimination had dropped dramatically. Other airlines were now asking to license their training program. The scholarship program, another part of Mr. Chen's investment, was already showing results. 20 students from underserved communities had started their aviation career training. Their photos lined the hallway, representing the changing face of the airline industry. In the break room, flight attendants chatted about how different things felt now. "Remember how tense it used to be?" one veteran crew member said. "Now we actually have tools to handle difficult situations." Others nodded in agreement, sharing stories of how the new training had helped them become better at their jobs. The media had followed the story closely. What started as a viral video of discrimination had become a case study in corporate transformation. Business schools were writing about it, calling it the Chen method, turning crisis into opportunity for systemic change. Ms. Rivera's role had evolved far beyond her original position. She now led sessions teaching other employees about recognizing and overcoming their own biases. Her honest sharing of her experience helped others open up about their own prejudices and fears. "The hardest part," she told a reporter, "was facing myself in the mirror. But Mr. Chen showed me that making a mistake doesn't have to be the end, it can be a beginning." Her words would later be printed on posters throughout the training center. The investment had paid off in unexpected ways. Employee turnover dropped significantly. People wanted to work for an airline that invested in their growth and treated mistakes as learning opportunities. The company's stock price had risen steadily as investors recognized the value of their new approach. Other industries started paying attention. Hotel chains, retail companies, and customer service centers began asking about implementing similar programs. The ripple effects spread far beyond the airline industry. During the graduation ceremony, security footage from that fateful flight played on the screen, but now it wasn't shown as a moment of shame. It was presented as the catalyst that sparked an industry-wide revolution in customer service. The new graduates represented every background imaginable. Among them was a former computer programmer turned flight attendant inspired by the airline's transformation to change careers. "This isn't just about avoiding discrimination," she said. "It's about creating a genuinely inclusive environment." Mr. Chen attended the ceremony virtually, his face appearing on the main screen. What happened that day could have ended with anger and punishment, he told the graduates. Instead, it ended with understanding and growth. That's the power of choosing transformation over revenge. As the ceremony concluded, phones buzzed with news alerts. The airline had just been named Most Improved in Customer Service by a leading travel magazine. But for those in the room, the real victory wasn't in the awards or recognition. It was in the small, daily interactions that showed how much things had changed. 1 year after the incident on Flight 1382, the airline industry gathered for its annual conference in Chicago. The main ballroom was packed with executives, crew members, and industry leaders, all waiting for the keynote speaker. The atmosphere buzzed with excitement. Mr. Chen rarely gave public speeches. He walked onto the stage dressed in the same style of casual clothes he'd worn that fateful day. The simplicity of his appearance stood in stark contrast to the luxury of the venue, making his message even more powerful. "A year ago, I boarded a flight as a passenger and ended up becoming part of something much bigger," he began. The giant screens behind him showed clips from news coverage of the incident, but they told a different story now, one of transformation rather than conflict. In the front row sat Ms. Rivera, now the Director of Customer Experience Training. She watched with pride as Mr. Chen shared statistics from their program's first year. customer satisfaction up by 58%, discrimination complaints down by 75%, employee retention improved by 40%. But numbers don't tell the whole story, Mr. Chen continued. He invited a young flight attendant to the stage, one of the scholarship recipients from their program. She shared how the airline's transformation had given her an opportunity she never thought possible. The presentation shifted to show live feeds from training centers across the country. In each location, new groups of airline staff were going through the program that had started with one uncomfortable incident. The virtual reality stations were in full use, helping employees experience customer service from every possible perspective. Our biggest success, Mr. Chen said, isn't in avoiding incidents, it's in changing how we respond to them. He played a recent video of a flight attendant handling a difficult situation with remarkable skill and empathy, using techniques learned from their new training program. The industry had indeed transformed. Other airlines had joined the initiative, creating a consortium for inclusive customer service. The training program had expanded beyond airlines to hotels, restaurants, and retail chains. What started as one company's crisis response had become a movement. Ms. Rivera took the stage next, her confidence evident as she addressed the crowd. "A year ago, I made a mistake that could have ended my career," she said. "Instead, it became the first step in my journey to help others learn and grow." The screen showed before and after customer feedback from various airlines. The improvement was dramatic. Comments about feeling welcomed and respected had replaced complaints about bias and discrimination. Real change was happening, one flight at a time. Mr. Chen then revealed their next phase. A nationwide mentorship program pairing experienced crew members with new hires from diverse backgrounds. The goal was to create a support system that would help transform the industry's culture from the ground up. "The real hero of this story isn't me," Mr. Chen said near the end of his speech. "It's everyone who chose to learn and grow from that moment." He gestured to Ms. Rivera and the many other airline staff members who had been part of the change. As the conference concluded, attendees received something unexpected. A small mirror with the words, "Change starts with reflection," printed on it. It was a reminder that transformation begins with looking honestly at ourselves. The airline's stock price had doubled since the incident, but that wasn't the measure of success that mattered most to Mr. Chen. It was the stories he heard daily, of passengers feeling welcomed, of staff members finding new confidence, of an industry learning to see diversity as strength. In a quiet moment after the conference, Mr. Chen and Ms. Rivera sat in the empty ballroom, reflecting on the journey. "Did you ever imagine it would turn out like this?" she asked. He smiled. "Sometimes the best responses to life's challenges aren't the ones we plan." The day ended with an announcement that would cement their legacy: the creation of an industry-wide foundation dedicated to promoting inclusive customer service. Funded by multiple airlines and tech companies, it would ensure that the transformation they started would continue for years to come. As Mr. Chen left the conference, he passed a wall of photos showing the faces of people whose lives had been changed by the program. It was a powerful reminder that sometimes the most meaningful revenge isn't about getting even, it's about making things better for everyone.